I'm Michael Jacobson. I'm the director of the CUNY Institute for State and Local Governance, also a professor of sociology here at the Graduate Center. I'd like to welcome all the folks who are here in person, as well as the people streaming globally online. This event, this series of three, which I'll talk about in a second, is co-sponsored by our institute, ISLG, and the Graduate Center's Office of Public Programs. ISLG is a policy and research institute at CUNY, and we work on issues like these in New York City and, in fact, around the country in about 60 or so jurisdictions. The Graduate Center, I think, as a lot of you know, is the hub for doctoral education at CUNY, and so many of our students and faculty study and research and are involved in issues like this, important and pressing public issues. We regularly offer events like this to help the sort of public understand some of these issues and some of the issues that we specifically work on. This panel tonight is the first in a series of three events about jail and incarceration in New York City. Tonight's on the issue, as you all know, of alternatives to jail. On December 1st, we'll have another event on the importance of case processing and length of stay in terms of running a safe, secure, and humane jail system. And the last event on December 8th is a sort of broader discussion on reimagining the purpose and operations of a jail system based on human dignity and human rights. So I'm going to talk about the panelists in a second and do really brief introductions. And there will be 10 minutes or so time for audience questions at the end. So in terms of the bios, and I'm going to do it very briefly, if you look online, these are all very distinguished folks who have long bios, but for the moment, Julia Solomon is a senior policy social worker at the criminal defense practice at the Bronx Defenders, where she's been since 2016. In her time there, she's worked in both policy and practice, representing clients with open criminal cases, while also advocating for state and local legislative changes. Sherene Crawford is an executive district attorney at the Manhattan DA's office, serving as the division chief of the Pathways for Public Safety Division. Here she oversees diversion, problem-solving courts, re-entry, and decarceration efforts for the office. Anne-Marie Louison has been with the Center for Alternative Sentencing and Employment Services, or CASES, since 1999, where she is currently the Chief Impact Officer. At CASES, Anne-Marie has led the development of programs for people with serious mental illness involved in the criminal legal system, including the award-winning Nathaniel Project, an ATI program for adults with serious mental illness convicted of a felony. Our moderator tonight is Krystal Rodriguez, the policy director at John Jay's Data Collaborative Justice. Here she develops policy recommendations and research to support evidence-based criminal legal reforms. Before joining DCJ, she was a director of law and justice policy at the Center for Court Innovation, and it's a pleasure to turn this over to Krystal.
Thank you. Good evening. To start our panel today, I'm going to offer a bit of context that I think is relevant to this conversation, just to ground us a bit. So first off, the title of this panel includes the phrase alternatives to incarceration. I want to say that we're using this broadly to capture both what is commonly referred to as alternatives to detention and alternatives to incarceration. So we're talking about diverting people away from jail both at the beginning of a case, during the pretrial period while they are presumed innocent, awaiting a disposition of the case before there's been any finding of guilt, and the alternative to incarceration programming that is offered as an alternative to jail sentencing. Now, also helpful, I think, is understanding the jail population and where it stands today. I'm offering a quick high-level 5-year overview of the jail, and we can see starting at 2017, that the jail population is on decline, reaches a low of about 3,800 in April of 2020, and since then has been increasing over that time period. I want to note that what we see in this chart is actually the 5-year tail end of a decade, of about 30 years of continuous decline and decrease of our jail population here in New York City since the 90s, when it reached just over 20,000. Now, to learn more about our jail population, I just want to go over a few quick facts. So right now, there's about 5,900 people incarcerated at Rikers Island or within New York City Department of Correction. Of those, the overwhelming majority are held there pre-trial. Over half of that population has received services for mental health concerns while incarcerated. And the racial demographics, as you can see, are incredibly racially disparate. We see that 61% of the jail population are individuals who are Black, and that's compared to the 24% of our represented within our general population here in New York City. So within the context of this conversation, I want to highlight a few things that often come up when we're thinking about jail, its uses, and how to divert people away from jail. In these recent years, we've seen drastic changes to the bail statute here in New York State, and one primary goal of that change is to have fewer people exposed to jail, find alternatives to divert people away from having to be incarcerated. And in New York City, the reason why I think this conversation is so pressing and so timely is that we're sitting really in the shadow that's cast by the ongoing human rights crisis at Rikers Island. So when we're talking about alternatives to jail for New York City, it means something very palpable, something that we're hearing a lot about. We're talking about diverting people away from pretty terrible conditions. There's been 18 deaths in custody in this year alone. So on that note, I want to turn the conversation over to the panelists who are here with us. First, and I'm gonna pass this question to any one of you or all of you to give your perspectives on it. Could you just begin to describe what are ATI programs or alternatives to incarceration? Who is served by them? What is the process to be approved to receive an ATI as opposed to jail? And what are the expectations for program participants?
Cool, so I'm happy to take that. Hi, everybody. So nice to meet everybody. Again, my name's Anne-Marie Louison, and I work at a nonprofit in New York City called CASES. And together with many other organizations in New York City, other nonprofits, at CASES, we do provide alternatives to incarceration services, as well as alternatives to folks being detained on Rikers Island while their legal case is going through the legal process. And so when we think about alternatives to incarceration program, in New York City, we actually have a very rich history of alternatives to incarceration services, actually going back to the 1960s when I was born. New York City started to provide alternatives to incarceration. And over the decades, these programs have evolved. And so currently, we have programs that work with young people. So they're very specific to the needs of young people. They might work with a young person between the ages of 18 to 27. They're really sort of focused on the developmental needs of those young people, whether it's related to education, work readiness, peer interactions, intimate partner sort of interactions, really sort of addressing the needs of young people who are a population that we find really highly overrepresented within the criminal legal system. We also have programs for women, so we have gender-specific programs that some of our sister organizations in New York City run, like the Women's Prison Association, the Center for Community Alternatives, where they run substance abuse treatment services that are really specific to the needs of women. And when we think about women who get arrested, we always think about women, they generally have children, they're generally the main caregiver. So I'm going to just give one example of a program that Cases has run as an alternatives to incarceration program. So we saw in the sort of data, like 51% of folks who are in the city jail system receive some type of mental health services, but there's also a subpopulation of folks who have serious mental illnesses. When we talk about serious mental illnesses, we're talking about diagnoses such as schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, and bipolar disorder, so serious mental illnesses. And one of the things we know about populations in New York City who have serious mental illnesses, there's very high rates of homelessness, both being unsheltered, living on the streets, as well as living in the shelter system, and a lot of lack of connection to mental health treatment services. So at Cases, actually for the last 22 years, and we have provided specific programming to people that have serious mental illnesses. It's in Manhattan, and Sherene's really going to sort of talk about how prosecutors decide who's eligible for an alternatives to incarceration program. But as a provider of those services, we get referrals from public defenders, from the prosecutor's office, from family members and loved ones who say to us, hey, you know, this person has been arrested. Sometimes they're arrested for a serious crime, a felony crime, and we're sort of, I think, going to discuss violent felony crimes and non-violent felony crimes, because I think it's a very important thing within the discussion of alternatives to incarceration. So in an alternatives to incarceration program, we are focused both on ensuring when we take someone out into the community that we are going to support the reduction of them engaging in behaviors that brought them into the criminal legal system. We're also focused on addressing the needs. And so in a program that's serving people with serious mental illnesses, those needs are related to treatment, so the treatment of the serious mental illness. The needs are also related to the social factors. So a big deal would be addressing the homelessness as part of our sort of response to that person. And then we have an obligation both to the prosecutor's office, who's agreed to allow the person to come into the program, as well as to the judge that's supervising the case. And so in an alternatives to incarceration program, your legal case does not go away. The court system is saying, hey, we're going to give you an opportunity not to go to jail or to go to prison, but to be in these treatment services. And while you are engaged in these services, we're going to monitor how you're doing. And so people who are in alternatives to incarceration programs have an obligation to go back to court where the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorney are going to receive information about how that person's doing. As a provider of those services at Cases, we also have an obligation to tell the judge and the prosecutor when something is not working out. And so that is the responsibility that we have around ensuring that the court system is aware of what's happening if it's good, what's happening also if it's not well. What I would say sort of generally, I think, about alternatives to incarceration programs is that they are part of our fabric. So as I said, they started in the 1960s in our city, and really supporting what we're describing as community safety. So safety for everybody, even folks who are accused of crimes, plead guilty to crimes, because helping people to address the issues that led to their involvement in the criminal legal system sustains folks in the long term not to engage in that behavior again. So you're changing the circumstances around them. And that really is about like sort of public safety and all alternatives to incarceration programs, whether they're focused on helping people get employment, whether they're focused on young people or women or people with serious mental illnesses. The outcome is not the fact that the person just did not go to jail. The outcome is that person is living purposefully in a healthy, meaningful way in New York City. And the outcome is that that person is anonymous to us, all of us. You know, they're not someone who's labeled as dangerous or a criminal, but the outcome is that they are able to live as a citizen in our community. Like that really is at the heart of what alternatives to incarceration programs are doing. And I'll hand it over to my colleagues.
Yes, Sherene, I would like to build off of what Anne-Marie just shared. What are some of the criteria or features or things you're looking at from a prosecutor's perspective? Like, how are you making the decisions about who, your office might consent to getting an alternative to incarceration as opposed to a jail sentence?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. Thanks to the Graduate Center and ISLG and Michael for inviting me to be part of this. So again, Sherene Crawford, and I'm at the Manhattan DA's office. So we are responsible for all of the cases that come in New York County, which is Manhattan. And I guess I would just want to add two things to Anne-Marie's very great description of ATIs, is in this context when we were talking about the jail population, also meaning the pretrial detention where people are being held while their case is still open, they have not been convicted of anything, and we have in Manhattan, which cases overseas, and I'm sure Anne-Marie can go into more details, is supervised release program. And that is, I think, I kind of fit it in this bucket of alternatives to incarceration. And then alternatives to detention are something that our office is often making decisions on and reviewing and working with a lot of the same organizations that Anne-Marie just outlined, where people can start engaging in some of that program pre-plea. And often what our office is looking at is, how did they do during that time? Were they able to address some of these underlying needs and issues? And can we start to turn that into an alternative to incarceration on the back end post-plea? So it's a pretty wide range of alternatives when we start talking about this in more depth. And to your question more directly, Krystal, about how do we make our decisions, who do we decide, what is the eligibility? I would have to say, this office and administration, we've tried to take a really broad brush. We don't, I say this a little bit cautionary, like we don't exclude anyone from being considered. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of in my role this last year here at the DA's office is DA Bragg has restructured the office and setting up what my division is a new division in the office focused on non-carceral outcomes. And with that, we have taken an approach where every case that is a felony charge that comes into the office is first looked at as, can we keep this person in community? Can we keep them in community in a productive way and do that safely? Ideally looking at, the idea of fairness and safety and looking at each case in that light. Instead of, I think, I once upon a time was a line prosecutor in this office. I think when we got a case, it was first, what is the sentence for this charge? How much time could this person face in prison? And now what we're doing is we're looking at each case and asking the question, can this person remain in community safely? And then my team really does what we call a public safety assessment. We want to best understand that person, their prior contacts with the criminal justice system, what led them into the crime that brought them to our office. Often we're talking to the defense bar and learning more about that individual. And then we usually get to a point where we're very partnered with community-based organizations, and specifically in our problem-solving courts and Supreme Court. And we work with community-based providers who are able to do clinical assessments. And because we are prosecutors and we're not trying to be clinicians, but we really want to understand what are some of the mitigating issues in that person's life that led to the offense. So if there is serious mental illness, if there's substance use, almost every case I review, someone has experienced great trauma. We can look at it and say, oh, it's a 20-year-old. Why did they do that? Well, because talk about brain development. And so we can make some assumptions based on what we know about the facts of the crime and information that we gather, but then also we're really reliant on our community-based partners to help inform that decision-making process. And at the end of the day, a lot of our decision comes down to, can this person remain safely in community and be responsible, held accountable? There's always a victim, a person who's been harmed in these crimes that we want to consult with and understand their perspective. And we have a responsibility there, but we also have a responsibility to the defendant. And if we can address some of these needs and underlying issues, they are less likely to hurt someone in the future. That's what we believe. So I could go on, but I want to give other people a chance to respond.
Yeah, I want to bring Julia into this conversation. So from the public defender perspective, right, you're serving folks who are going through the criminal legal system represented by attorneys, and you're a social worker sort of assisting that representation. What are some of the features or programmatic aspects that you're looking for from your side?
Thank you so much. Just echoing what others have said, I'm very grateful to be here, very grateful to everyone in the audience for expressing interest in this important topic. And just a little bit about sort of my role. So my name is Julia Solomons. I'm a social worker at the Bronx Defenders. And at our office, social workers partner with attorneys to sort of meet our clients where they're at and to even sort of separate from their criminal case, to kind of talk with our clients, figure out what their goals are, what their needs are, what services they might be interested in engaging in regardless of their interaction with the criminal legal system. And so, I think to that point, when I think about ATIs or alternatives to incarceration, it's actually almost more of a philosophical shift than just like a physical description of something, right? It's looking at, I appreciated so much about what Sherene just said, because I think it's looking at a person, sort of taking them outside of the context within which, I met them, being arrested and charged with a crime, and asking sort of what it is that they need and what they want, and what they haven't had or been provided in their lives thus far, and then taking that and using it to sort of match them with what available services or programs might exist in the community that could work with them in, achieving those goals or receiving that support that they've identified. And then the next step after that, right, is working with the court system and with our partners in the DA's office to figure out if that will work as a resolution to their case. But first and foremost, it's person-centered. It's meeting the person and figuring out what it is that they need and want and tailoring the services to that. And so, to that point, our favorite type of alternative to incarceration program, right, or our favorite type of person who works in a program like that is someone who does that same thing, who meets our client when we refer them there and asks them what their goals are and what their needs are and sort of tailors the program structure around that. And that means, not only being flexible with what the actual program participation looks like, but also being flexible about timing. If someone has a job or parenting, childcare responsibilities, being able to sort of work around that, allow them to continue living their life while also receiving these services. It also means sort of language accessibility, having different language speakers on staff that can meet the needs of our clients. Unfortunately, we see a lot of our Spanish-speaking clients struggle to match with programs that have Spanish-speaking staff. Insurance, people who don't have insurance being able to participate, just sort of fewer eligibility barriers and more flexibility to accommodate dynamic human beings, because at the end of the day, right, our clients are dynamic people, complex people with lives and complicated needs and complicated histories. And so we really hope that we try to match them with programs that can meet them where they are and receive them as their whole self, as opposed to just sort of someone that was arrested and looking at them through that lens. So I really appreciated sort of this general narrative shift around meeting people and meeting their needs, as opposed to looking at them as a person who's charged with a crime and framing the services around the crime, the charges, as opposed to sort of the person.
Could I ask something sort of following up on that, this idea of shifting the narrative? I think we often think about jail, and we think about jail as a response to crime within the community. And there's certainly an sometimes overwhelming expectation that that is probably the first or the primary or the most effective way to respond to crime, right? But how do we shift that narrative around community safety? And maybe more specifically, if you all can speak to how do ATIs contribute to overall community safety?
I can start. Well, I think from where we come from, not some of what I've said is the shift and move towards public safety, because what we know, and maybe you can correct me, but I think it's about 65% of people who are incarcerated once they are released commit a new crime. It's something in that range. It's high. And so I think it's important to remember the impact that incarceration has, and that most people are not going to prison for life. They are going to return to their communities. For that time that they are away, they are disconnected from the supports, community, people in their life. Also, when we talk about, what was shared about Rikers, but generally prison and jail can be quite traumatizing. And of course, I sit here as someone who works in a prosecutor's office. I do believe, and our office believes that, sometimes incarceration is necessary, and it is necessary to keep communities safe, and we do use it as it is needed, but I think it can't be the default, and we have to have a conversation about the impact of that incarceration. And also, I think often our communities aren't as aware of things that we're talking about here tonight, so I'm glad everyone's here learning. But that there are other ways to respond to crime in our community and also have safety at the same time. I often say that when we talk about restorative justice, something that our office is newly, embracing and doing, where there is an opportunity to repair harm and bring together harm parties and people who committed harm. It's not the right thing to do in every case, but it can be a very powerful thing in the right case. And often when you talk to victims of crime and people who have been harmed, they don't even know that that could be an option. And generally, historically, it hasn't been an option. So I think in shifting the narrative, I think we need to start having conversations about things that are alternatives to what we know. Often when we see people come into our office, that's the only thing. It's jail or nothing, right? And that's, kind of public perception, and also, I think, what it was for a long time. So I think just being able to have more dialogue.
If I could just add sort of, I think, a concrete example of what it looks like to shift resources, I think, away from jail and into communities. I think sometimes it's hard for people to conceptualize that. So, at the start of the pandemic, we were trying to reduce the shelter population and reduce the jail population for public health reasons, right? And so the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice created a program. They recruited Exodus Transitional Community, which has an ATI program as well, to run a hotel program where people were released from jail and prison into hotel rooms, and in those hotels they received wraparound services, on-site medical and mental health care, and case management. And so it was a response to a public health crisis, but what it also did was provide these very concrete resources and things that people need, housing being sort of the first and foremost, right? Immediate, accessible housing, free of barriers, free of wait lists. People could just go and have a private space where they could sort of recenter themselves and try to get stable and get the support that they needed. And so I think that proved to us, right, that we didn't need to keep people in jail if they didn't have housing or didn't have the resources that they need. Like, we could move them out and offer them these concrete, tangible things that they need, and they could do really well in that environment. And so I think, we just need to do more things like that, sort of give these concrete resources to people that they've stated very clearly that they need, and jail just isn't doing that.
I think I would just sort of go back to people experiencing serious mental illnesses. Like, the criminalization of mental illness in the US is really a terrible thing. It's a real thing. It happens across this country. It happens in New York City, and treatment works. Like, literally, mental health treatment does work. And so I feel that when we think about sort of the narrative around public safety, sometimes what we see in terms of crime or alternatives to incarceration is the notion of the criminal legal system, the prosecutor's office are being asked to solve mental illness. Like, Sherene literally is being asked, like, how do you solve the mental health issue in New York City? And clearly we really sort of do need the city health department, the New York State Office of Mental Health, to really be solving the problem around serious mental illness in our city, which we all see. We all see, if you ride the subways, you see. Do you know? And so I think about sort of the narrative of public safety, and really we have to sort of give ourselves grace to really go back to what is this problem, and I just focus a lot on serious mental illness. And so with serious mental illness, we really do know what the solutions are, both in terms of evidence-based practices, like at cases, the Alternatives to Incarceration program that we run, and one of them is a mobile treatment team that has a psychiatrist, it has a registered nurse, it has case managers and social workers, it has people with lived experience who we call peer specialists, and it's an Alternatives to Incarceration program, so it's an intervention after people have been arrested. In New York City, we also have assertive community treatment, this mobile model for people coming out of hospitals. We just need more of it. Like, there's a wait list, like there's always a wait list in New York City for this, the most intensive mobile program for people with serious mental illnesses. So, like, that's the solution, and that's the change in the narrative around what is the real problem behind how we see so many people with serious mental illness, with psychosis, going through our courtrooms day in and day out.
Can I quickly just double down on that? I think the resource thing is something that we've been talking a lot about this last year at the DA's office, because we have a mental health court there. And frankly, I was actually talking with someone this afternoon about that, and he said, well, how long do we keep this person here? I mean, mental illness, mental health issues, behavioral health, they can be lifelong, right? This person should not be tied to the criminal justice system. They ended up here because, yes, they committed a crime. We're mitigating there and using this specialized court, but, they can't be tied to this court forever. And so we have to make sure that on the back end, there's community resources that can help continue to support that person. And then on the back side, just being able to have more upstream. And I know in New York County, we're extremely limited. We only have, about 50 or 60 cases that court can hold. If anybody here, as Anne-Marie said, rides the subways, kind of follows the news, like, we know that there are more than 50 cases in our court system right now that would be well served by participating in this court, and that it's a capacity issue. All of us want more there, and that we have to invest in that and recognize, that this is a real issue that we're, if we don't pay attention to it, it does impact public safety.
I really appreciate some of the points you are making, and I want to invite the audience to get involved. If any of you have a question, there's a mic on either end. I invite you to walk up to the mic so we can all hear you. And maybe just give your name and your affiliation if you don't mind.
Danielle Gerard, I'm a senior staff attorney at Children's Rights. Julia, good to see you. You've all been great. This has been brilliant. I have 3 questions, please. One is, how many people are in ATIs? You just mentioned 50 or 60 in mental health court, but approximately, how many people are in ATIs? Where does the funding come from for ATIs? And with Rikers closing in 4 years, are concrete steps being taken by the city to ramp up ATIs, supportive housing, and mental health services?
I can maybe sort of start, and between us, I think we could cover your questions. Thank you. It's a really important question. So one of the main funders of alternatives to incarceration programs in New York City, like, we have the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice that coordinates criminal justice for our city. And so they're a main funder. The Mayor's Office invests approximately, so I may not get this 100% right, but anywhere between maybe 15 to 19 million a year in a range of alternatives to incarceration programs. They also invest, as Sherene was describing, for the pretrial services program that we have in New York City called the Supervised Release Program, which is in every county. And so the Mayor's Office decides sort of the portfolio of the alternatives to incarceration programs run by nonprofits. And then we have a model in New York City called Supervised Release, which is for people, for our bail services. And that program, because of the changes in the law, is serving increasingly more people every year. So at Cases, as Sherene mentioned, we are the provider in Manhattan. And so at any given time, there are about 2,000 people that we have under supervision for pretrial services. So maybe across our city, it was probably about 4,500 people, maybe are sort of under supervision across sort of New York City. And then you have these range of alternatives to incarceration program, which I believe, like, the Mayor's Office sort of committed to have at least 7,000 to 8,000 slots available with their funding. But one of the things, as Sherene mentioned, it's not enough. So all providers, DA's office, sort of invest in getting grants and private funding to support and build capacity around that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to the fund. I think that's right. I mean, some of the providers that we work with, most of them are funded by the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. Some of them have private philanthropy money. The Manhattan DA's office made big investments in the prior administration and carried through in this administration. There was a lot of bank forfeiture money, about $800 million, that allowed the office to invest in what's called our felony ATI program, and also a project called Manhattan Justice Opportunities that works primarily in criminal court on alternatives to incarceration, but that funding is limited, and so, you know, really a call to the city of like showing the success of that, and then, you know, the city ultimately picking up the costs of those alternatives.
And I would just add that as part of the closed Rikers plan and the points of agreement reached between the mayor's office and city council does include plans to continue to fund ATIs as we plan to continue to lower the jail population to match the borough-based jail plan.
Hi, so I'm Michelle Risa, and I conduct programs worldwide to bridge this gap in polarization via communication, right, from contentious to connection. And I'm asking, what percent thrive in your ATI programs, however you define thriving, though I'd be curious to your definition, and those who are not initially matched, if they're in prison and they, again, however you define, good qualities are exhibited during their time there, are they able to then get out and be matched to an ATI program?
That's a really great question. Thank you for that, because I think it's really great that you're centering the people, and that's really, really important. So, and I'll just do sort of broadly, sort of cross ATI programs. I think what we know is that they do work, and the notion of thriving, I would let the people going through the programs to describe. I think from both sort of operation side and an expectation of the sort of criminal legal system, we look for a couple of things. So while someone is going through the program and once they've left the program, there really is a high expectation of no new contact. So not being rearrested again, do you know, like that sort of notion? And then I think the point that I was making around sort of purpose, do you know that people, like, for me, when I think about people with serious mental illnesses, I describe thriving as you do not notice that this person may have serious mental illness. And then that is a state of being in recovery, do you know, from the untreated serious mental illness that we see visibly sort of in our city. So if I was to just describe what thriving would look like for someone with serious mental illness, it would be that they're in recovery. Recovery means you have the ownership of your own goals around what that means for you, but it also means that you have home. So that's just sort of critical. You have connections, so loved ones and intimate sort of relationships, and you have purpose. Like, those are the things around purpose. I think that generally we believe that, you know, like, the vast majority of people that enter these programs are successful, whether that's 70% for some programs or 65% or sort of 80%. I know we are in that range in the programs that we run at Cases in terms of completing your legal case without being incarcerated. And so I'm glad that you centered the people, and it would be great if we had someone up here to describe what that meant for them. And in hearing people's stories, it really is about those things of the people listened to me, they were respectful for me, they heard what I wanted to do, they appreciated I made a mistake, but I'm not defined by making a mistake, if I'm pleading guilty to a crime, all of those sort of essential qualities, and then I'm giving back. Like, I have a job, I have a home, I'm safe, I have a cat, you know, might be thriving for some people. These are the things that I've heard in the clients that I've worked with. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, similar to when we're matching people with programs or referring people to programs, that it's based on an individual. Like, success is also a very individualized term, right? It's a matter of perspective and sort of in relation to where that person is when they first connect with a service or a program. And so just to give an example, I have a client who has pretty significant cognitive challenges, and for him, creating an email address and being able to engage via email and via Zoom is something that he was never able to do before, and now he is doing that, and as a result has more connection and more support than he did before. And so I just always try to sort of, again, bring it back to the individual person and remind people that people are not homogenous, and for one person success might look one way, and for another person it might look another way, and the most important thing is to always be centering that individual person.
Hey, thank you all for sharing your expertise with us. I really appreciate it. I guess my question is, so we've talked about how crime is a response to like social and economic problems in the city. And so it's, from what I've noticed, there's a lot of fear mongering that goes on when crime, obviously we've all noticed there's a lot of fear mongering that goes on when crime goes up. How do you see, in the context of, in the political context where the last 3 mayors have run for president, it's very easy to, suddenly change policies or whatever, like thinking like in a grander sort of political landscape. How do you think we can institutionalize ATIs, I guess? I'm not sure if this might be for Sherene. It sounds like your office is doing a great job, but political whims can change, and yeah, that's kind of just what I'm wondering about. Thank you.
Yeah, I sure, I'm biased, right? Like, I think what we're doing is pretty unique in our office, and I'd love to see how it could map on to other offices and jurisdictions, but I think the more that we, like so many societal changes, right? When I think of things in the civil rights movement, they become laws, they become part of something that is required and expected of people in our society or institutions. And so I think we're very lucky here in New York because this culture of ATIs is pretty embedded throughout the 5 boroughs. And I see Anne-Marie shaking her head, so somebody agrees with me. And so I think it's that, and also, I spent some time nationally working with prosecutors at the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution, and I think it's becoming, more of, there's this wave of progressive prosecutors in the last 10 years, there's some backlash to that, but even in some smaller, more conservative jurisdictions, I do see that this is just becoming part of prosecutorial offices and the expectation. But I also think the more that we can sort of legislate and build these things into the expectation of our court systems and how they work and how they're funded, I think it will help to make it, an essential part of how we see the system working.
And if I could just build off of that, there is actually a bill in the legislature right now that's called the Treatment Not Jail Act that would codify the expansion of alternatives to incarceration into law, and it would expand judicial diversion eligibility. So basically, it would mean that more people are eligible for diversion, are eligible to participate in alternatives to incarceration instead of jail and prison sentences. And it also sort of shifts the model, the way that the court system responds to people, and centers clinical needs and clinical providers making the determinations around programming, as opposed to sort of judges and prosecutors. It's just sort of the way it currently operates. So just a quick plug that bill could really make a lot of progress for us.
Hey, I actually came 10 minutes late, so I'm super sorry. And maybe you answered my question and I just didn't hear it. But I was curious as to when did this shift occur between a person as a criminal to a person as a person who committed a crime? And is it a solid shift? Do you think that within the criminal justice system, from policing to, of course, sentences, jailing, and prison, and I guess getting out of prison and reintegrating, is there a piece that is, and I know nobody wants to speak poorly of any system or piece, is there a piece that needs improvement? And did this, and I guess that's a twofold, which is are we there yet with that big shift of you're a human, you're a person, or are we actually just like still slowly almost changing, we're getting there? Thank you.
I mean, I can probably we're calling the panel alternatives to incarceration because incarceration remains the default, both like in, I think, the human conscious, although I have to say that in New York City, we've definitely have, actually, we started in the beginning talking about this like 30-year decline in the jail population since the 1990s. So over time, New York City has become less reliant on jail. Obviously, the conditions currently at Rikers, I don't think speak well of how humans are valued, right? Like that's not a great example, but overall, New York City has been able to decrease its reliance on incarceration. And I think part of the reason why we're having this conversation is to hopefully continue that trend, right? Continue to talk about the ways in which we can continue that shift, right? From like thinking of people as just the worst possible day they had and the crime they committed and thinking about them more as a whole person. I don't know if anyone wants to add.
No, I think it was option B, where slowly, progressively, I mean, I could give many examples of days in court where I do not hear people treated and the way that, you know, we're describing as people and human, you're not the worst thing that you've done. So we have, I think all of the systems, the police, the courts, the prosecutors, we all have work yet to do.
I'm sorry, but the first part of the question is there a piece that was particularly lagging within the criminal justice system, like from policing to, again, I know nobody wants to talk badly of anyone.
No, I think that, I mean, I will try to try to respond to the question. I think there certainly is a dehumanization that happens throughout the criminal legal system, every part of it, unfortunately. I think what we hope to do, and I think some of the work that's happening, for example, at the Manhattan DA's office, is to think about this problem of crime or the responses to individuals who have committed crime in a different way. Are we there yet? Absolutely not, right? But I think that part of what's happening is that we're getting closer to the right conversation. And as Anne-Marie highlighted earlier, ATIs have been something that the city has been investing in since the 1960s. So it is part of the fabric. I do think we're getting better at it, but the entire criminal legal system as a whole, I think wherever you look at it, is it representative of our best human values? Absolutely not. Are we constantly and fervently upholding constitutional rights? Absolutely not, right? But I think that there's certainly folks in the right places who are invested in changing that. Is it fast coming? Not as fast as we would hope. But but we're having this conversation because we want this to be part of the public narrative. We want this to be part of the conversations you all are having at your kitchen tables, right? How do we look at the criminal justice system, and what do we expect of the criminal justice system when someone does commit a crime? When something does happen in society, what is our expectation, and what are we hoping to see as the actual outcome? I don't know where we are in time.
We've got like 10 more minutes.
Oh, awesome. So I think we have a question on this side.
Hi, I'm Carissa. I'm a student at John Jay in the Master's in Economics program, and I'm currently working on a research project that is related to mass incarceration and looking at those statistics globally and historically. So I was really interested in coming today and hearing your guys' insight. So this has been really fascinating. I have several questions. I'll try to limit them. But let's see, my first is really just a question of clarification. It wasn't clear to me what the difference is between ATIs and something like typical probation. Is this just kind of a reformed probation, a more comprehensive probation, or is it something different altogether? I'm also very curious if you guys have any data yet on like how effective ATIs are in deterring crime, given that that's the whole purpose, is deter crime, increase public safety. It'd be great to be able to make the case politically that, ATIs are more effective at deterring crime than, throwing people in prison. So yeah, curious if there's data on that. And then I'm also related to that, I'm very curious what you guys think is the role for police in this process. There's, one argument that the U.S. focuses too heavily on penal severity, so having harsh sentences and very long sentences rather than on effective policing. Ensuring that if someone commits a crime that they're actually caught for the crime that they commit. So is there a role for increasing police on the street so that people are caught sooner in the process and crime is deterred, in advance, I guess? Yeah, curious.
Wow, some really complex questions. I think I'll take the first one. I'll try to. So you just were looking at the difference between alternatives to incarceration and probation. Maybe I'll just sort of take you through a legal case, just really quickly. So someone gets arrested. They get arrested for any type of crime, a misdemeanor crime, which is I stole something that's less than $1,000. Or they get arrested for having drugs on them, and that's the amount of drugs is like a felony crime. And Sherene's going to give me the specifics because she's the prosecutor. So I got arrested. Within 24 hours, I appear in front of the judge for my first court appearance. Because of bail reform in New York City, there's an opportunity that while my legal case continues, I don't have to be detained on Rikers Island. And that we call pretrial services under this umbrella of alternatives to detention. So while my legal case is going on, I could be in the community. And then I'm going to be supervised by a nonprofit. I have to sort of meet with the staff at certain times, like if it's weekly or twice a month. I have to take phone calls, and that program is going to assess my needs and support me to attend all my court appearances. So that's sort of an example of alternatives to detention. So let's take the person who's arrested on drugs, had enough drugs in their possession that it's a felony for which they could potentially go to prison for some moment in time. So I've been in the community, I've been going to my court appearances, and with my defense attorney, I have decided to plead guilty to this felony crime for which I could go to prison. And the judge and the prosecutor and my defense attorney have worked out that, hey, I need Anne-Marie also has a substance use disorder, and I could benefit from treatment. And so all the parties have agreed, rather than sending Anne-Marie, I'm just going to make it up to prison for 2 years, that I'm going to get the opportunity to participate in alternatives to incarceration program. And so that's and then I'm going to be monitored, attend court dates, I'm engaged in treatment, and at the end of it, I'm going to get the resolution of my case in a way that doesn't result, because I did everything that I was supposed to, in me going to prison. Let's take the same felony case, and I'm pleading guilty to it, and the judge has decided that the sentence for me should be probation. So sort of probation's a New York City agency. We have probation officers who supervise people in the community, similar maybe to alternatives to incarceration programs, for people who have pled guilty or been found guilty of a crime and are going to be sort of on probation for a certain period of time. In New York City, if I was arrested on this felony and I pled guilty to it, I'm going to be on probation for 5 years. I'm going to be supervised by a probation officer. I have to report to that probation officer. They're also going to assess my needs and connect me to services, because we really have good probation services in New York City. We're really fortunate. People don't have to pay for probation like they do in other jurisdictions, or be on probation for like 10 years or 15 years. So that's the difference between probation. I think you're going to have to repeat some of the questions for the next one.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just ask the second question.
Okay.
The effectiveness in deterring crime. Is there any statistics in how effective ATIs are in deterring crime?
I mean, I will just say, and I can't rattle off statistics off the top of my head, but I know that there are reports on treatment courts specifically and their effectiveness, and definitely the recidivism rate, the rate of people sort of committing new crimes and going back to jail is lower for people who are permitted to participate in treatment court versus receiving, a straight jail or prison sentence. And I believe the Center for Court Innovation has some reports on their website that you can look at around those statistics.
Definitely for diversion programs, even for diversion programs for people with serious mental illnesses, we actually have some really good sort of national data from different sites. So if you just search for it, you will find it.
Okay. Thank
I
you,
think we
guys.
have time. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you for sharing your expertise and time with us tonight. Given that in New York City there are at least 20,000 felonious assaults every year, 20,000 victims and victims' families, how do you feel about ATI for such people, where they could possibly go back and do another assault of someone? Some of the things that we mentioned obviously are not fearsome to any of us, subway, turnstile jumping, etc. But stuff like violent crimes, do we want these people back on the streets, or do we want to detain them?
Sorry, I just want to start by saying that many of the crimes that are reported unfortunately never even reach the hold of the court. So I think there's a lot that can be said around responses and supporting individuals who have been a victim. But I just want to be clear that whatever number of crimes that are reported, unfortunately, are not even accessing the court, right? Like if an arrest isn't made, if they're not brought before the court, if they're not arraigned, we're not even quite addressing the issue that you're speaking of, right? Folks who are perhaps fall victim to violent behavior. Unfortunately, when we think about it, when we're in the ATI context, a couple of steps have happened in order for them to even be afforded the opportunity to go to an ATI. So we're talking about maybe a smaller window of the overall number of the kind of crimes you're talking about. I just wanted to give that context, right?
Thank you for the context. Our office does look at assaults and violent felonies frequently, and we take them very seriously. And as part of our assessment is talking with the victims of those crimes and understanding how this impacted them. We have a really robust witness aid services unit at the DA's office, and making sure that they get connected with services and resources as a result of the harm that they've experienced. And then we have to look at some of the things that I think Anne-Marie has pointed out is, are there mitigating factors that led to that violent act, and that even if they are removed from society by being incarcerated, they are likely at some point to return to society. Can we safely keep them in community and get them the help so that they don't hurt the next person? That's not always possible. Sometimes people have issues that, by our assessment, unfortunately, there aren't always the resources and services available that we can feel that we have those assurances, but we have a duty, as prosecutors around public safety, to really think deeply about that. And we understand that every time we make this decision, it's a calculated risk. We're humans dealing with humans, but we really take it seriously and think that it's, an important consideration that we have to make, but it's not that we would automatically agree to that without a very deep assessment.
For instance, there was a very high-profile murder in Buffalo. You probably saw it, where ex-husband beat up his ex-wife, and the wife wanted protection, and they did not incarcerate this, ex-husband, and then he went ahead and killed that woman. So rather than putting him in jail, detaining him, he was let off on his own recognizance. So that's what I'm talking about, where things are happening that don't allow the public to be protected. Very high. It was last month. Maybe you read about it. You heard about it in Buffalo.
Yeah, I think I know the story that you're referring to. I think there was actually this great. There was this great thread about this very case issued by the Times Union, upstate newspaper out of Albany. But I think that we can talk a little bit more about that. I think what would be a goal to achieve is addressing underlying causes of crime. For example, what assessment is being done when that particular complainant or victim comes seeking help from police, come seeking resources from the DA's office. Whoever is able to touch that case, I think we need to have a broader conversation around how to build community safety, particularly as it relates to domestic violence, because those are such distinct and different cases. I think part of what I hear Sherene saying today is that part of the evaluation, certainly when we're talking about alternatives to detention to ATIs, when folks are, meaning the DA's offices, public defenders, and service providers are having these conversations, there's a lot of underlying facts that they're looking at, right, to determine who should be sent to ATI, where jail is an option on the table. And I don't think that these decisions are being made lightly at all. I do think that there are these cases, there are these extreme cases, but we're talking about developing general practices and policies that allow us to be more responsive to those underlying causes to crime, and that in the long run perhaps will prevent something like that happening in the future. I really appreciate your question, and I really appreciate the engagement of this audience. I want to take the time, that's all the time we have. This was such a great conversation. Thank you to the panelists who took the time to be here with us today. Thank you to our audience who is here in person, as well as those of us who joined us online. And I'm going to stay here a little longer, so I'm happy to continue the conversation with the folks who are here. All right. Have a good night.